afterwards to try to challenge the election result based on the breaches that we really can't know if it was a legitimate result. Not so much that she could prove that it had been hacked, but that there's just no way to know with the breach of the election center and the stolen poll books. And it turned out there was some sort of really rare error with a memory card that caused the counting to stop at 9 o'clock on election night. So she filed this lawsuit, and within days of her lawsuit, the election center deleted all the information on its servers, which would have been a key piece of evidence in her election challenge. And they deleted all the backups as well.
And this didn't get a lot of attention ever. I don't remember hearing about it at the time.
See, that's the thing, is that none of these things have really caught much media attention. Georgia 6 did catch a little bit of national media attention. There's a reporter named Kim Zetter who's been covering suspicious elections since we turned to electronic voting machines in 2002. And she did do a story about the breach at the election center in Georgia, and it was in Politico, so it did get some national attention, but as far as the talking heads, nobody talked about it. Nobody. At least I don't think so. And the wiped election server, that might have even made it into the New York Times. It certainly made it into the AP, and I think also Politico. It's possible it made it into the New York Times, but it's my big beef with the news. Really, a lot of this has to do with my experience with Georgia 6, is it's not that they don't cover it, but they don't emphasize it, so they just move on, and then everybody forgets. So unless you're paying really close attention and you don't know what happened at all, and even if you knew it happened, there's so much other stuff thrown at you that you forget, and so much sort of unilateral focus on just Russia that it doesn't come up. So I've been begging. I often send my articles and Twitter posts to people like Rachel Maddow and Joy Reid, and I've really wanted them to pick up the story, but so far it has not happened. There was something else about the Georgia 6 election, which is that I'd been talking about the paperless machines. Well, even paperless states like Georgia, often for their absentee ballots, their mail-in absentee, they use paper, mail-in absentees. And so Georgia is the same, and those would be the only verifiable, meaning you can double-check they're still counted on scanners, which can be hacked, but at least you can check the paper ballots. And Ossoff won those 64% to 36%. And historically, they have leaned Republican. And yet, somehow on the paperless, unverifiable machines, Handel managed to turn that around. So again, I'm hoping that Georgia 6 can maybe be a step toward helping people overcome their confirmation bias to take this problem seriously. So that is really why I wrote about Georgia.
All right, and I will plug our upcoming episode next week, which is about the politics of Georgia.
Yeah, that's a great coincidence.
In which we will maybe be able to talk about this some, and also a past episode of ours where we talked to Lucy McBath, who is running for the Georgia 6th Democratic nomination. So Georgia has had their initial primary elections. They have not yet had their runoff, which is, I believe, July 25th, and she is one of the two people in the Democratic runoff for the Georgia 6th who would be facing Karen Handel.
Wow, that'll definitely be an election to watch, and really for any elections going forward, this was actually another reason why, not so much why I felt I needed to write about Georgia initially, but why I felt the need, this was my third go-around on my Georgia article, and why I really felt the need to get it out now, is because just as Georgia was at the forefront of bringing touchscreen voting machines to the country, its current Secretary of State, who's incredibly corrupt, he's one of the biggest voter purgers in the country as far as Secretaries of State go, he's determined that if he can't keep his paperless touchscreen machines, which he has defended as long as he possibly could, the problems with the breach at the election center and the wipe server made him realize he had to move to paper of some sort. So he is chomping at the bit to make Georgia the first state to deploy these new machines from a vendor called ES&S. That I think I mentioned them. They're the largest vendor in the country. They're called the Express Vote, and he wants to make Georgia the first state to deploy the Express Vote statewide. And there are many problems with the Express Vote that I want people to be aware of, and I think the Georgia story can help bring light to this because it's happening as we speak. So a lot of people say, well, we shouldn't talk about election security this close to the November primaries because it'll discourage people from voting. But we really have to, because if the states have outdated equipment and it matters what they replace their terrible to begin with outdated equipment with, and they are flocking to the express vote. And the express vote, it's ES&S really absorbed, it actually bought Diebold Election Systems, the one with the felon who was the programmer. It bought Diebold Election Systems in 2009. The Department of Justice made it sell Diebold, and then Diebold dissolved supposedly and was really absorbed into ES&S, mostly with some of its assets sold to another company. But most of the key personnel seemed to go to ES&S. So you're sort of dealing with the same Diebold people who brought us these terrible vulnerable touchscreen voting machines, now pushing this new touchscreen system called the Express Vote. And in fact, it was Georgia's former election director named Kathy Rogers, who I write about in my article, who is now a senior VP at ES&S and flying all over the country promoting the Express Vote very successfully. And she's the one who has been lobbying the state of Georgia to buy it. And she almost succeeded really recently. She almost got legislation. She lobbied the Georgia legislature to specifically allow barcode balloting. These touchscreen voting machines called the Express Vote put a barcode on a paper summary card, and the barcode, which people can't verify because we're not computers, is what's actually counted as your vote. So it's barcode balloting. And she almost convinced the Georgia legislature to amend its code so that it would allow barcode balloting. It almost passed. No one's paying attention. Marilyn Marks, who I mentioned, sounded the alarm. I helped her, Garland Favorito at Voter GA. Some on-the-ground activists helped defeat this legislation, but it is definitely not over. And ES&S is incredibly powerful. And I think the media is completely uninformed. They call these things paper ballot systems because the election officials and vendors call them that. But again, real paper ballots don't put a barcode on your ballot and then have the barcode counted. That's not a real paper ballot. But nobody knows this because the media is calling them paper ballot systems. A paper ballot system, a real paper ballot system, which is what everyone should be using, is a hand-marked paper ballot run either counted by hand or on a digital scanner. That's it. You don't need a touch screen. And it's an incredibly dangerous situation that is unfolding right under our noses that nobody is paying attention to. We will be stuck with these terrible touchscreen barcode ballot markers for the next 15 years, and we won't have verifiable elections for another 15 years if there isn't sort of this massive groundswell of people waking up. And that really is why I felt it was so important to get this Georgia article out now, despite the fact that, yes, we are coming up on a very important election in November.
So with these express votes, there would be no way, again, to sort of retabulate, to do a recount, because if the barcode was somehow hacked and that was, sort of pointing toward the wrong votes, then you wouldn't have any way of going back and verifying what the person actually meant to vote for.
So it's a little more complicated than that.
Okay.
No, I can explain. It's not that complicated. There's a paper summary card that comes out, which is what everyone's calling a paper ballot, and it has the barcode that's the only thing that's counted as your vote. Almost no states conduct manual audits right now, so there's no protection from manual audit laws. The few states that have them, they're incredibly cursory, just little spot checks that IT experts and statisticians say would never be able to discover hacking. Mm. So you don't get manual audits. So then you're talking about manual recounts. Those really offer very little protection, or I'd say no protection, against mildly sophisticated hackers, because recounts only happen when the candidates are within a very small percent. Almost all states, it's 0.5% to 1%. Mm-hmm. So you just flip enough votes to make a greater vote margin, like what happened in 2002. You had swings as great as 15%. Then you don't get an automatic manual recount. The parties could sometimes, depending on the state's laws, a candidate can request one, but they have to fund it themselves, and that often costs well over $1 million, which a lot of these candidates simply cannot afford, especially after running an expensive campaign.
Right.
And then the other thing about it is that although there is text there that you technically can read, it's so abbreviated that it really is incredibly difficult to impossible to verify. And I explain this better in my article than I probably can here, but there is a extremely intelligent professor of statistics at UC Berkeley named Philip Stark who is very concerned about these. He invented risk-limiting audits, which are the types of manual audits everyone should adopt nationwide. And he testified to the Election Assistance Commission that even he was unable, it wasn't testimony, but he told them that even he was unable to verify his vote using his memory wasn't good enough, given the highly abbreviated nature of the text on the printout, so he was unable to verify his ballot. And if he can't do it, most of us don't have a prayer of being able to verify our votes. So yes, then you audit something that really hasn't been verified, or recount something that hasn't been verified.
And so if our listeners are concerned, as I am after listening to this, what are the steps they should take? What are the things that they can do to try to help ensure that, in fact, our elections have integrity?
IT experts recommend, and I recommend, that everyone should be using hand-marked paper ballots counted on optical scanners or by hand. I do make an exception for ADA use. Absolutely, people who are unable to hand-mark their ballots should be able to use an assistive device, and if they want it to be a touch screen, I think that's fine, but not for general use. So you need to be, number one, clear about that, and number two, you need to be clear that summary cards with barcodes are not real paper ballots. Don't get fooled. Number three, you need to start contacting your election officials in your own states and making sure that the plan, and maybe your own county is even probably better. Contact your own county election board and make sure that they're planning to use or at least have available at your request hand-marked paper ballots. So, and make sure that they're not planning on buying these touchscreen ballot markers with barcodes. So that's number one, contact your county election boards. Number two, if you're in Georgia, there is a petition to use hand-marked paper ballots in the midterms. And that's at Georgia Votes Paper on Facebook. So if you just go to Facebook and type that in, it will come up.
Okay.
And if you're a Georgia voter, you should absolutely sign that. But we can also learn something from this nationally, which is that even, again, paperless states typically allow paper for absentee, and they have scanners for that. So there's absolutely no reason why they can't use those scanners, even in the 2018 midterms, for the general population. It would just take a little longer. And so we need to really start advocating this at the state level. So that's number two or number three. The other thing you should know is that at the federal level, there is finally a piece of legislation called the PAVE Act. Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon introduced it, and we should start calling our members of Congress in Washington, D.C. and demanding that they pass it, because it is the only piece of federal legislation that requires that states give voters the option to mark their ballots by hand. The other thing I would say is to, if you're interested in learning more, is to buy a book by a friend of mine named Jonathan Simon. His book is called Code Red, Computerized Elections, and he has a 2018 edition, and it was one of the things that really drew me to election integrity advocacy in the first place. And the more you know, the more effective you can be at advocating for free and fair elections. So, and then of course, I would want people to follow me on Twitter and on Medium, and also the election integrity advocate I mentioned, Marilyn Marks, who's doing so much good work in Georgia with her pending paper ballot suit.
All right, excellent. We'll put links for all of those things up on our website as well so that people can find those.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yes, well, thank you. So maybe a little more alarming than some of our episodes, but this, I think, is really important stuff for people to know about and to think about. We don't often think about who we're voting for, but not how we're voting.
That's right.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And everyone, you've got your call to action for a few things that we should definitely do and do quickly.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you again for the opportunity to let me on your show. I very much appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Imunari. And we're using it with express permission of the band. Our logo and all original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and is done expressly for Two Broads Talking Politics. We can be found on our website at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com. You can reach us by email at twobroads